we got the time for the video we've both been waiting for, where we get to compare Wine Sargasso and Jane Eyre.
Exciting
Super
stuff.
fun.
Jane and Bertha and Antoinette, with all respect, they were created to be mirrors of each other, as we're going to kind of go into it, but we also thought it was important to kind of talk about them as their own people, because, you know, they are women. So
their
it's
own
important.
individual
It's important.
women. And who are we?
We are
not Rochester here. We are not trying to possess them and put them into something that they don't deserve to be in.
Now we're going to talk about how they complement each other, and how they also don't. So that should be really interesting and fun for us to talk about.
So excited.
I guess the first thing we'll talk about is their upbringing. So both of them, as we have previously mentioned a little bit in the past, they're like orphaned almost to a sense, where they didn't really have like a strong guardian that they really looked up to, for example. So they both kind of figured it out on their own. With Jane Eyre, she was a legitimate orphan, and then with Antoinette, she had a mother, but her mother was really concerned with taking care of her brother. So she never really had.
Super aloof.
Yeah.
Didn't really care that much for her. She did have Christophine though, that did was like a really good like mothering figure kind of, which like in Jane Eyre, like that kind of is filled by like the nanny. I can't remember her name. She wasn't like a super big character. That and the like teacher at Lowood, like they both kind of like helped in her, like Jane's like coming into herself, where like Antoinette, it was Christophine that kind of helped in a weird way. You know?
Both of them throughout their novels and throughout their storylines, they each were at 5 places throughout the whole thing. Jean Reese did a really cool job with making sure that the plot and like the setup of the story was really similar. So although they had very different life experiences, they both did live at 5 different places at one point in their life. They coincided with each other. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess. So yeah, like they had like their initial like their home that they like grew up in and stuff, and they were kind of oppressed in it, you know, like they, like I said, like they were both like the liminal kind of characters that didn't really fit in for like Jane, for the reason that like she didn't really have a family, like especially the window scene that we discussed. But in like Antoinette, in her case, it's like she's growing up like European, like of like French or like European descent, but she's growing up in the West Indies, where she's super out of place there. She doesn't really know how to identify or place herself in either of those positions. And then so both of the characters like go to this school kind of, for Antoinette it's like a convent sort of school sort of thing, and for Jane it's similar. Like those are like good points in their lives. Antoinette, I feel like she does feel kind of she belongs sort of after her time there, and then, you know, like after Antoinette leaves that school, she's married to Rochester, and from then on within like the novel it becomes from Rochester's point of view, which we talked about. It's like symbolic of her losing her place in the world as a person, because she like simply takes his last name, or like he takes her last name technically, and so yeah, just is kind of symbolic of her losing her sense of self.
This is similar to Jane Eyre and like her progression through the novel and stuff as well. Basically her going from one place to the next, going from Lowood to Thornfield. She didn't, and again, we have to remember that Jane has more of a sense of self than Bertha, which is one of the things that they differ from.
It's a huge contrast. So, it's important in their fates, I guess.
And it's important to remember that, just in the fact that like their experiences in moving changed them, but it didn't change them in the same way. So although Bertha was losing herself as she was moving, Jane really was able to find herself more as she did. She was challenged. It's, you know, important to say that she was challenged, but she did find herself more. And the closer she got to Rochester, the more she figured out, and the more sense of self that she did find through that. And then ultimately, when she goes from Thornfield she went to the Moore House,
which is super imperative in her like understanding that she's kind of an independent person that's like not willing to like let Rochester possess her like that. People oftentimes like look over that her portion of time at the Moore House, but it's like so important, and Jane like it's so important, like so much happens while she's there. Like as a person, she realizes what she wants. Like she realizes that she doesn't want to like just settle with Sinjin, and because like she doesn't want to like keep her passions for like Rochester inside, because she remembers like what happens to Helen, keeping her Helen burns. But yeah, I feel like, you know, Antoinette never had the opportunity to like be separated from him in order for things like her passions to be kind of sorted out. Like she didn't have the ability to separate herself. Like she tried to, like she wanted to leave, but Rochester was in charge of all of her money, and like since they were married, and so she didn't get a chance to separate herself, whereas Jane did have an out. She had an out. So
she wasn't married to him either. She had her time and then she chose to marry him. And then that transition from Morehouse back to Thornwood, and I guess back to Ferndian.
The house that he wasn't willing, Rochester wasn't willing to put Antoinette in, or Bertha at this point in, because it was so disgusting and moldy, and he was like, it would have been terrible for her.
However, Jane again is more resilient than Antoinette. She sounds fragile, but you know, after having him being mauled and blinded so conveniently, shout out to Bertha, basically having that transition again from going from that place to the next, she really did have a defined spot in her relationship and her home there, and that she ended up obviously a lot happier than Antoinette did at her final destination, I guess. So she really, this transition in her movement really helped her grow, whereas Antoinette's consistent movement and feelings about the different places she was living kind of hurt her a lot. The transitions they were making helped and hurt both of them in different ways. And I'm about to spit fire.
Oh God. So yeah, so we talked about in the last video how important like fire was in both of these novels. So we'll talk about like a specific section in Wide Sargasso Sea. So the village, like the other people in like the village that Antoinette is living in with her family, they, you know, all kind of rebel in a way, and they set her house on fire. This mob of people is like coming in on them, and they're like approaching them. It's like pretty terrifying, and they're all distracted because Antoinette's mother's parrot, whose wings were clipped, tries to fly, and he like kind of throws himself into the fire because he can't fly. And so that's super symbolic of like the end of Wide Sargasso Sea, which also lines up with the end of Jane Eyre, where Bertha, Antoinette, I feel like I'm disrespecting her when I say her name's Bertha. She sets the house on fire, Thornfield on fire, and then she throws herself into the fire. How many times am I gonna say fire? So there's like this, her setting Thornfield on fire and throwing herself into it is this act of like defiance and rage and rebellion, and it parallels kind of with the like parrot kind of throwing himself into the fire. He didn't throw himself into the fire. The way that the parrot saves the life of Antoinette's family parallels to Bertha's own self-immolation saving Rochester and Jane's relationship and making it more suitable for like to happen. So like the fire there is like super important.
So the fire in Jane's room can be paralleled with the fire that happened I mean, I guess there's a couple, again, there's a lot of fire in Jane Eyre. The fires that occur in Jane Eyre, the one in Rochester's bedroom that we kind of briefly touched on in the last video, the fire at the end of Jane Eyre and at the end of Wide Sargasso Sea, that kind of it's the same fire, but you know, those fires, and then the fire that is experienced in the beginning of the book in the Wide Sargasso Sea, they all do parallel with each other and kind of what they represent, just extreme amounts of passion. So obviously the fire that is in Rochester's bed, kindling sheets, broken pitchers, we have it all here. Just
incredibly
literal loads of passion
of
and love,
sexuality and
innocence being burned and all that good. Drapes that are falling. Bertha was the one that set this fire, which is super symbolic just because Bertha is obviously, Antoinette, I'm sorry. She's obviously a symbol of passion, so the fact that she's setting all of these fires, that's a huge symbolic
And it has to do with, like, while Bertha is still in the picture, everything that happens between Jane and Rochester can't be possible in a way without, like, ending, going up in flames.
Love that.
Went there, fire.
Passion. Fire equals passion, which equals madness.
Yes.
That is exactly what fire represents.
We're gonna talk about the birds. We're gonna talk about the birds and the bees, but mostly the birds.
Just the birds, really.
Just the birds.
Just the birds. Birds are super important in both of these novels. There is a lot of talk about birds, specifically in Jane Eyre throughout the book, but really in the White Sargasso Sea at the beginning. The first scene that we have in the entire novel is Jane Eyre reading a book about birds. She's also stuck, and she is, again, a liminal character, so she's not really free, but she's not trapped. She is at the beginning, I guess, but she's not free. And, you know, birds symbolize freedom. And in this case, Jane is wishing at the beginning of this novel that she could be free like a bird. That's kind of where she chose a book about birds, we're assuming.
Just like the fact that her name is Jane Eyre.
Birds like the air. What do you think? The air is wild and natural. Birds do inhabit the air. And
man, her name is just.
That we could have a whole video on this.
Just unpack her name, but we're not gonna. We're talking about birds.
Air, yeah. So
air.
Birds are inhabitants of the air. Symbolism here and the connection that we have, the parallels that we get between her name and just her desire to almost like be a bird, I guess, transform into a bird and be free. Is super symbolic.
Which kind of goes into the kind of myth, the role of a nightingale.
It's really important, just because she often, whenever she is not in contact with when she hears the nightingale, she gets really sad, and like a lot of sadness overwhelms her. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the past and the history of the nightingale. The story of about a woman named Philomel, and she has a sister named Procne, and this man named Tyreus is married to Procne. However, Tyreus does rape Philomel and tries to keep her from telling about this rape. So he tears out her tongue and keeps her locked in the forest. And so Philomel also bears children, so she weaves the story into a tapestry and smuggles it to Procne because unfortunately she's unable to tell the story without a tongue. So Procne ends up killing her children and feeds them. We love this. Feeds them to Tyreus. Tyreus then chases her, and she turns into a bird, and Philomel turns into a nightingale.
Yeah, and like nightingales are used a lot in literature. I think the Bronte sisters actually are known for using the nightingale as like a symbol of kind of like longing and kind of stuff like that. But I mean, in volume 2, chapter 23, I'll read the little quote for you. A waft of wind came sweeping down the laurel walk and trembled through the boughs of the chestnut. It wandered away to the indefinite distance. It died. The nightingale's song was then the only voice of the hour. In listening to it, I again wept.
I can't read.
Oops.
Not a language major. Anyways, so again, she definitely is taking this relationship with this bird, the nightingale, and she's relating it to kind of the sorrow and the being trapped that she feels with her feelings about Rochester. She doesn't feel like she can escape it almost, and she needs to make a decision. But
definitely foreshadowing as to like what's kind of going on. Also, like Philomel, like being trapped by the man, like as in like Antoinette is trapped.
Friends, she's trapped in a small confined space in the dark, so by a man, just as Philomel was done by Tyreus, yes. Philomel, as she was trapped, she was also silenced. And we often get the sense that Rochester is trying to silence these women. He doesn't really give them a voice. Specifically, Antoinette, he literally locks her in an attic, and she doesn't ever get her own voice.
About her,
and she doesn't get to tell her story. She doesn't get to have this opinion, which Jean Reese so beautifully did in her own story. But unfortunately, we never really got to hear that, just as Philomel did. So that's also why birds are important in Jane Eyre as well.
Which kind of like, I guess, segues into
Rochester.
Or how
Rochester. I said
We
it.
just shouldn't say that.
Said that.
Really
We need to
don't
take
stand.
a moment to talk about how terrible this man is.
Anyone that like reads Jane Eyre and like romanticizes that.
Like, I have some really, really terrible feelings towards a man that does not even exist. And we feel like we were hurt by him too.
I kind of like place a lot of my hatred towards him on other men in my life. He's like super representative of like that type of guy back then.
The type of man you didn't want to be with, but you kind of got stuck with anyways. Rochester, I don't even, we obviously don't like him, but we do need to talk about him because he really, truly influenced these women, specifically and especially Antoinette. He completely changed their lives. Jane Eyre, we're lucky that she had, you know, her own identity and her own self, but we get to see in the White Sargasso Sea how things could have gone if she didn't have that kind of personality and she didn't really have that sense of self like Antoinette did. There's a lot of different ways that he tries to take away their voices and identities, and in some cases is very successful with that. The first thing I think we're really excited to touch on is names. He is consistently trying to rename Jane he successfely renamed Antoinette to Bertha. The book.
Never really refers to her, like he does like call her Jane sometimes, but he's always calling her Janet, and like when they're like engaged or whatever, he's calling her Janet, like Rochester, and
he's really trying to take away her identity. He's trying to strip her of that because he loves control, because he feels threatened by her.
things he doesn't understand and things he feels threatened by, he tries to possess it, which we would see a lot in White Sargasso Sea. But yeah, just like it's really important to note that like when Rochester tries to do so and like tries to like possess her and buy her and like control her, Jane is like super resistant and like has a backbone. It's Jane Eyre, sir.
She puts her foot down about her name. She really is like, you're not gonna call me that. I'm not taking that. And she also has like a moment where she really is repeating, after he proposes to her, she keeps repeating like Jane Rochester, like it just doesn't sound right to me.
She's not a person that is like in existence yet. She's like, there's like a lot of like imagery of like stillbirth, like it's this person that's like not born yet, but like in a way won't be.
Yes.
It's super weird, and she just has a lot, like I think she takes a lot of, I mean she recognizes the pride that comes in like having your own name and like identity, and
that's like the only thing she's had growing up is her identity. She's been from place to place. She doesn't have parents. She doesn't have any of this stuff. She doesn't have a real home, but she does have herself and her name. And that's one thing that she's not willing to give up for a man, which we love.
Yeah, so Bertha isn't actually named Bertha. Her name is Antoinette.
We were pissed to find this out. Let me tell you.
So her name is Antoinette, and
she was named after her mother. That's also really important to note.
Yes, he begins to call her Bertha to try, like it's a very European name.
He tries to dissociate her with her mother because her mother went insane.
He really tries to dissociate her from who she is, like her as her heritage, and so by calling her Bertha, I mean, it's like one thing to take a last name, but it's like another completely to like completely change someone's first name. It's like I said, very symbolically violent, and
she lets him.
She just lets him. Rochester says, "Don't laugh like that, Bertha. My name is not Bertha. Why do you call me Bertha? Because it is a name I am particularly fond of. I think of you as Bertha." And she says,
"It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter." Girly doesn't ever again have that support for her own identity. Like she never gets that.
She's super complicit in the diminishment of of her identity that Rochester is like actively taking part in,
which is terrible. It's really terrible.
And it's all because he's very
insecure
and like things that he does not understand, he really tries to control. Like throughout White Sargasso Sea, it has a lot to do with like nature. He like doesn't understand like the like literally like the nature of like Antoinette's personality and like her upbringing, but also like the nature, like actual physical nature, and he doesn't understand it, but like he says like I want to possess it. Like things he doesn't understand, he just tries.
He feels
to
like he needs
grab
ownership of it, and he like therefore thinks that renaming her, like he gave her that name. Like it's almost it's almost like a very parental thing to do is to take, like, to give, obviously, to give your kid a name. Like, he's literally renaming her so that, you know, she identifies herself as Bertha, and that's who gave her that name. It was Rochester. So by honestly taking control of the situation and of her, then he now owns her in a sense. She, if I do say so myself, buys her with a name. So that's names. Now, let's talk about the gaze, the male gaze. That's the tea. This is the tea. We obviously have talked about the male gaze throughout a lot of literature. It's really prevalent in female Gothic specifically. We talk about it in Handmaid's Tale. We talked about it in Frankenstein a lot too. We talked about it in Dracula. We talked about it a lot in Victorian literature specifically. And even though The Wide Sargasso Sea isn't technically a Victorian literature, it is based off of a story that was written in that time period. So Rochester doesn't give up this gaze.
Until he has to. So, I mean, we like, first of all, like, earlier in the semester, we really talked about, like, the gaze as a role in the Bloody Chamber. And, like, obviously, like I said, we're not going to get into the Bloody Chamber. You should read it for yourself and see the parallels between Jane Eyre and the Bloody Chamber. But it also goes into, like, this idea of, like, the egalitarian relationship where, like, I mean, women are never, like, it's like, in the relationship, they're always going to be objectified by this gaze, and like the narrator of the Bloody Chamber ends up with the blinded piano tuner. He'll only see her true self and not objectify her in like the physical kind of realm. But just like it kind of parallels with like Rochester, he's constantly like his gaze, and it's really interesting that we see in Jane Eyre, like Jane like challenges his gaze, like she stares back and like objectifies him, and like we talk about how they're like the person that is like the object of the gaze, like Riley's staring at me right now, it's like causing me to look into myself more and become more hyper aware of myself. So it just, I mean, since he's blinded at the end, it also makes their relationship a little bit more easier because she can no longer be like,
she can't be owned by his gaze.
Yeah.
She's obviously being objectified, and we also see him consistently trying to buy her and to own her and control her, and he can't do that anymore if he can't like objectify her in a literal and emotional sense.
Like when we're talking, like just the two of us, like we really go
like
off.
there's some hate speech going on, and there's absolutely no shame with that. Like,
he's not real. He's not here to defend himself. He isn't real. Like no one cares.
Like, he's the definition of a boy. That's exactly what he is. He's a